He who does not command respect earns contempt. Niccolò Machiavelli.
You were in the middle of a conversation. Maybe it was your boss, maybe it was your girlfriend, maybe it was your so-called friend, and they said something slick, something sarcastic, something just disrespectful enough to sting, but just subtle enough to ignore. You paused for half a second. You felt it, a sharp edge beneath their words, a flicker of contempt in their tone. But you smiled. You laughed it off. You let it slide. And in that moment, a decision was made. Not by you, by them. They decided you're not a threat. They decided they could get away with it. They decided you're the kind of man who would rather be liked than respected. And once people sense that, it only gets worse from there. Here's the truth most men quietly avoid their whole lives. Disrespect doesn't always come from hate. Sometimes it comes from comfort, familiarity, weakness. People test boundaries. It's in our psychology. And when you show that yours are flexible, that your self-worth can be mocked without consequence, you become a playground. They don't always mean to humiliate you, but they will if you allow it. Because the world doesn't rise to meet your potential, it falls to match your standards. So ask yourself, how many moments like that have you let slide? How many small, invisible betrayals have you absorbed without protest? How many times have you sacrificed your edge just to keep the peace? This video is not about violence. It's not about screaming. It's not about being feared. It's about becoming untouchable. About becoming the kind of man who doesn't need to raise his voice because his silence is heavy enough. Stay with me, because if you're tired of being disrespected, this is where it ends and where your standards begin. Disrespect isn't always loud. In fact, the most dangerous forms are quiet, subtle, socially acceptable. It sounds like a joke at your expense. It feels like being the last one picked. It looks like someone interrupting you, looking through you, or talking over you like your words are just background noise. This is where most men get confused, because it doesn't always look like hostility. It looks like sarcasm, playfulness, just teasing. But the body knows. You flinch, even if just a little. You feel the drop in energy, the hit to your self-worth, the anger that flashes before your brain tells you to bury it. This is not in your head. Disrespect is real. It's psychological currency, a social weapon. And here's the cold truth. People treat you the way you've trained them to treat you. Every time you brush it off, laugh it off, or stay silent to keep the peace, you're not just avoiding conflict. You're programming them. You're teaching them how little you value yourself. Disrespect is a test, and most men are failing it. Not because they're weak, but because they were never taught the rules. In every room, there's a pecking order, a hierarchy. And whether you like it or not, people are constantly scanning you to figure out where you belong. They test your tone, your body language, your silence. They want to know, can I get away with this? If the answer is yes, they will. Not because they're evil, but because that's how social dynamics work. Respect is not given, it's enforced. That means every moment of silence after an insult is compliance. Every chuckle after a dig is an admission of submission. Every time you let it slide, you reinforce your position at the bottom. And here's what most men don't realize. You don't have to fight to win back respect. You have to stop accepting disrespect. Because the moment you stop tolerating it, the moment you stop letting it slide, is the moment people start looking at you differently. There's a sickness that spreads quietly in the hearts of many men. It doesn't cause pain at first. In fact, it often feels like something noble, something good, something society applauds. It's the disease of being agreeable, of being liked, of being the nice guy. You know him. The man who smiles when he's insulted, the one who apologizes for existing, the man who bends so far to avoid conflict he forgets he ever had a spine. He's not respected, he's used, he's not valued, he's tolerated. And the worst part, he thinks he's doing the right thing. Most men are conditioned this way from childhood, told to be polite, accommodating, quiet, told not to fight, told not to speak up, told to make everyone else comfortable, even if it means burning alive in silence. This conditioning turns into a belief system that if you're kind enough, you'll be loved. If you're patient enough, people will stop hurting you. If you let things slide, they'll eventually respect you. But that's not how the world works. Because people don't respect weakness. They exploit it. Tolerating disrespect is not peace. It is inner war. A war where you're the only casualty. You become the man who says, "It's fine. No worries. It doesn't bother me." But deep down it does. You swallow the insult. You bury the feeling. You smile through the sting. And what happens next? They do it again and again. Until one day you don't recognize yourself in the mirror. You traded your edge for acceptance, your voice for silence, your dignity for peace that never came. It's time to understand this. You were never meant to be liked by everyone. Respect is worth more than approval. And every time you betray your boundaries to keep the peace, you tell the world you are unworthy of both. That ends here. Because the man who cannot say no is already gone. And the man who learns to stop chasing approval is finally becoming someone worth respecting. Let's go back, not to your last relationship, not to the boss who humiliated you in front of your team, not even to that fake friend who smiled while mocking you behind your back. We're going deeper than that, back to the first time you were told, "Be quiet. Don't talk back. That's rude. Say sorry." Back to when you were a child. See, no one is born weak. No man comes into this world tolerating disrespect. He is trained to, and that training often begins in childhood. You were punished for speaking up, scolded for defending yourself, taught that obedience was morality and self-respect was rebellion. When your boundaries were crossed, they didn't call it disrespect, they called it discipline. You weren't taught how to confront injustice, you were taught how to survive it, and survival meant silence. You learned to lower your gaze, to keep the peace, to smile through discomfort, to be agreeable even when your soul screamed no. That is not maturity, that is programming. They didn't teach you emotional control, they taught you emotional suppression. They didn't teach you strength, they taught you compliance. And so, every time you felt disrespected later in life, you didn't erupt, you froze. Just like you did back then, because your nervous system remembers. This is why you rationalize their insults, why you excuse their mockery, why you gaslight yourself and call it being the bigger person. It's not that you're weak, it's that your nervous system was trained to see self-protection as danger. But here's the truth, that training was a lie. Being silent in the face of disrespect is not noble. It's self-abandonment. And the longer you honor that childhood conditioning, the longer you live under someone else's control. You weren't born to obey, you were born to rise. And it starts by unlearning the lesson that silence is safety, because the man who swallows his voice eventually forgets he ever had one. They say no man breaks all at once. He dissolves slowly, through 1,000 tiny humiliations he told himself weren't worth reacting to. The half-jokes that cut too deep, the meetings where he was talked over, the woman who kept him in her orbit but never truly respected him, the friend who always had a subtle dig to throw, the family member who dismissed his ambitions with a smirk. Each time he stayed quiet. Each time he made the same calculation. It's not worth the conflict. But here's what no one told him. Every time you let disrespect slide, you trade a piece of your soul for peace that never comes. Over time, a man who swallows disrespect becomes hollow. His self-respect erodes not because others took it from him, but because he gave it away, drip by drip. This is how good men turn bitter, how strong men forget their strength, how leaders become cowards in their own lives. The accumulated cost of disrespect isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. Your body knows when you're being disrespected. It tenses, your jaw locks, your chest tightens, and when you do nothing, that tension gets buried. You don't release it, you store it. That's why men walk around clenched, angry, and exhausted. Not from battle, but from holding back the battle that needed to happen. Disrespect unreleased becomes rage repressed, and rage repressed becomes depression. Most men think they're just tired, but what they really are is buried alive beneath years of tolerated disrespect. No one tells you that the little moments matter more than the big ones, because it's the little ones that program your self-worth. So when you tell yourself, "It's fine, I'll let it go," you're not letting it go, you're letting yourself go, and that is death by 1,000 cuts. But here's the truth, it only stops when you make a new rule. From this moment forward, You don't tolerate what insults your soul, not because you want to fight, but because you finally remember who you are. And that man, he doesn't bleed quietly anymore. Let me give it to you straight. People don't respect what you say, they respect what you enforce. That's the brutal truth most men never want to accept. Because it feels nice to think that if you explain yourself clearly, if you communicate maturely, others will honor your boundaries. But in reality, that's not how the world works. People don't respect intentions, they respect consequences. They don't care how many times you ask politely, they care about what happens when they don't listen. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine two fences. One is made of barbed wire, the other is a line drawn in chalk. Which one are people going to avoid? Exactly. And if your boundaries are just words with no consequence, you're the chalk. You're easily stepped over, erased, forgotten. Here's the core law of power. Power is felt, not told. If people can test you and suffer no loss, they'll test you again and again, until your entire identity becomes a doormat with a smile. But when your presence says, I will walk away, I will cut you off, I will withdraw access the moment you cross me, now they listen. Not because you threatened them, but because your energy is non-negotiable. And make no mistake, fear is part of respect. Not fear of violence, not fear of aggression, but fear of loss. Loss of your time, loss of your presence, loss of the peace you bring into a space. When people feel that you have standards, not because you said so, but because your life enforces them without apology, they adjust. You don't have to yell, you don't have to explain, you don't have to beg. You are the line. And people who don't know how to respect it, they no longer exist in your world. There comes a point in every man's life where he has to decide, do I keep swallowing disrespect to keep the peace? Or do I become the kind of man who doesn't need to be liked to be respected? This is where the transformation begins, because everything you've tolerated up until now, every subtle jab, every dismissive tone, every moment you kept quiet when your soul screamed otherwise, wasn't just weakness. It was programming. You were trained to tolerate disrespect. And now it's time to rewire that programming. Step 1. I am no longer available for disrespect. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to scream it. You just decide it. This becomes your internal law. And when something becomes law in your mind, your body follows. Your posture shifts. Your eyes stop darting for approval. Your voice loses the tremble of needing permission. You're not playing the same game anymore. You're not trying to be liked. You're trying to be undeniable. Step 2. Replace the need for approval with the power of indifference. You were taught to fear rejection. Now you'll learn to weaponize it. When you stop fearing people walking away, something incredible happens. You start walking like a man who's not afraid to be alone. And people feel that. Indifference to disrespect isn't weakness. It's the highest form of control. Because it says, you can try to provoke me, but you can't move me. And that stillness, it's magnetic. Step 3. Enforce consequences, not emotions. The weak man argues, justifies, tries to explain why he deserves better. The powerful man enforces consequences. Someone mocks you in public, you leave. Someone crosses a line, they lose access. Someone tries to guilt you. You go silent. You don't argue. You act. And you act without emotion. Why? Because when you show emotion in response to disrespect, you reveal it still has power over you. But when you respond with calm action, you teach the world, I don't beg for respect. I set the terms. Step 4. Practice micro-boundary wins daily. Start small. Practice saying no. Hold your ground in subtle conversations. Don't laugh at the joke that wasn't funny. Every time you hold the line, your nervous system adapts. You stop flinching. You stop shrinking. You stop apologizing for being someone who respects himself. This is how it starts. Not with a war, not with screaming, but with a decision. I am done betraying myself to keep others comfortable. Every time you honor that decision, you build spine. And every time you let disrespect pass, you lose it. Disrespect rarely announces itself. It slips into conversations dressed as a joke, hides behind sarcasm, or whispers through a dismissive look. And in that moment, that split-second moment when your body tenses and your gut twists, you know exactly what just happened. But most men freeze. They laugh it off. They pretend they didn't feel it. Why? Because they were never taught how to respond without looking emotional or insecure, so they take the hit in silence, and the one who disrespected them, they walk away knowing they got away with it. But not you, not anymore. Let's make this clear. You do not have to shout. You do not have to explain yourself. You do not have to win the argument. You just have to hold the frame. 1. The pause and stare method. When someone disrespects you, don't immediately react. Pause, then lock eyes with them. Hold your stare. Say nothing. Let the discomfort expand in the air. Most people are terrified of silence because silence makes them feel seen. By not reacting emotionally, you force them to confront the weight of their own words. This alone has made many men backtrack, apologize, or go silent out of sheer psychological discomfort. 2. Repeat what they said slowly. This technique exposes passive aggression without needing to accuse anyone. Let's say someone says, "Oh, I didn't expect you to be good at that." Instead of laughing along or getting defensive, you look at them and say, "You didn't expect me to be good at that?" Say it slowly, almost with curiosity. What you're doing is making them own their words. You shine a spotlight on what they tried to sneak past you. 9 times out of 10, they stammer, backpedal, or get visibly uncomfortable. That's your win, without aggression. 3. Ask, "What did you mean by that?" The simplest, deadliest phrase in your arsenal. It takes emotional control to say this calmly. But when you do, you transfer the pressure back to them. It's a mirror. You're not escalating, you're not emotional, you're not even accusing, you're just asking for clarity. But the moment they try to explain, they realize how exposed they are. People who dish out subtle disrespect often rely on your silence to stay hidden. When you calmly ask, "What did you mean by that?" you make them naked in front of their own words. The power of calm confrontation. Understand this. Calm is terrifying to manipulators. Anger is easy to dismiss. Rage makes you look weak, but controlled, quiet defiance, that's what makes people remember you. Because when a man doesn't flinch, when he doesn't raise his voice, when he refuses to play the emotional game, he becomes dangerous. He becomes respected, not for what he says, but for what he doesn't tolerate. There comes a point where you stop trying to get people to respect you and start becoming someone they simply can't afford to disrespect. Respect, at its core, is not something you chase. It's not something you demand through pleading, shouting, or over-explaining. It's something that emanates from your being the same way a lion doesn't need to roar to be feared in the wild. His presence is enough. When you live as the lion, you no longer draw boundaries with words. You draw them with your energy, your silence, your willingness to walk away, and your unwillingness to explain yourself to people who already understand what they're doing. A man who lives as the lion doesn't negotiate his standards. He doesn't tolerate just this once. He doesn't make excuses for others just because he wants to avoid conflict, because he understands a deeper truth. Every time you let it slide, you teach the world who you are. You become your own signal. And when you allow even a small act of disrespect to slip by unchallenged, you weaken that signal. You lower your value in the eyes of others and in your own mind. The standard is no longer there. It crumbles into a suggestion. But when you hold the line, when you say no without flinching, walk away without explaining, and respond with silence that screams louder than words, that's when people adjust to you. You become the one they measure themselves against. You become the gravity in the room, not because you shouted, but because your dignity had weight. This part of the journey is about embodiment. It's no longer about learning how to react to disrespect. It's about becoming the man who rarely even has to, because the standard is felt before it is crossed. And when you live as the line, people feel it the moment they meet you. You thought this was just about respect, but it was never just about that. This was about your soul, because every time you tolerate disrespect, every time you bite your tongue just to avoid tension, every time you pretend it didn't sting just to keep the peace, you lose a piece of yourself. And it doesn't happen all at once. No one walks in and steals your manhood in a day. It happens slowly, until one day, you wake up and don't recognize the man in the mirror, not because he looks weak, but because he feels erased. That's what disrespect does when it goes unchecked. It doesn't just bruise your ego, it corrodes your identity. So this is your line in the sand, not the loud, angry kind, not the performative rage, but the calm, cold decision. I will never let it slide again. Because a man who tolerates everything will eventually stand for nothing, and make no mistake, no one will come and fix this for you. Not your boss, not your woman, not your friends. Respect isn't a gift, it's a standard. And standards must be enforced. You enforce it by how you carry yourself, how you look people in the eye, how you remove yourself from people who poison your dignity. You don't chase validation, you radiate presence, you don't bark, you don't beg. You just make one thing unmistakably clear: I am not a man you disrespect. If you're done letting it slide, subscribe. This channel isn't for weak men trying to be liked, it's for men ready to be respected. Drop a comment below. What was the last moment you tolerated something you shouldn't have? And what would you do differently now? You don't need to raise your voice to be powerful. You just need to raise your standard, be the line, and never let it slide again.